All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about writing. As I mentioned in my previous video, this is one of the first steps that I have to implement in order to bring Stick Figure World to life. And can, writing can be tricky, but not necessarily. You just have to have kind of a roadmap to show you where it is you need to go. So every story, of course, has a beginning, middle, and end. And typically, especially in the like fantasy genre and all of that, they're following some sort of hero's journey. So if you don't know about the hero's journey, I would Google Joseph Campbell, a hero with 1,000 faces, or just the phrase hero's journey, and it'll lay it out for you. But you have a hero in regular life who accepts a call to adventure. There's a refusal of the call. Then there's a wizard or somebody wise. You think essentially just watch Star Wars: A New Hope. That is the hero's journey in a nutshell. That and The Matrix. So they do Belly of the Beast, climax, all that stuff. But the hero's journey doesn't actually give you a train of thought regarding how to actually construct a story. Now, I personally believe that you should always start with your ending in mind. Now, the reason for that is I think it helps guide you up to that point. And to make this clear, one of the things that I do whenever I'm writing a story is I use a sports season as a metaphor. So let's say you're a basketball team, right? And your goal is to win a championship. That is the end, right? That's the end. The end of the story is, do they win the championship or not? Now, that doesn't mean that's the most intriguing part of the story. That's not describing the stakes of them winning the championship, right? They could, be uniting a community. You think, remember the Titans. It could be the school's going to cut the funding for the basketball program, and if they don't win the title, then basketball's gone. And these kids' futures are at stake, or you know what I mean? Like, you can literally raise the stakes, but the championship is the end. We know that is the end. So you start at the beginning of the season and you watch how this progresses. And our goal is to take the character development side of things and constantly challenge our characters, throw things at them, have them have to make choices and what have you. But when you lay out the story in the framework of like a sports season, all of a sudden you can kind of see why starting with the end makes sense. So when it comes to my stories, what I'm looking at is, where is there a pivotal moment where like I would want to take the story somewhere else? And I'll start with that as kind of my end, and then work back to the inciting incident. That first thing that really, propels our characters into action. So that is my goal, like when I sit down and actually start to write. And then what I like to do I like to lay everything out. There's something called the Pixar method, which is, once upon a time, regular life, then this happens, and this, and then the conclusion. Now, the reason I follow the Pixar method, again, Google it, is because Pixar is amazing. So they have created some of the, not just best animated movies, they create amazing movies. So their storytellers, range from, people coming up through the Pixar ranks to some of the directors with, incredible accolades. And they've all spoken incredibly highly of working with Pixar, at Pixar, and using that story method. So I like to take that and then apply it to the story that I've kind of outlined and make sure that everything, lines up. So after that, I like to break things down more into scenes, not necessarily acts, and they're not scenes the way they're necessarily written in a script, but I think of them more like pivotal moments. And what I'm trying to do now is actually break the story down in a way that feels like the characters' decisions have consequence, right? What you don't want is a story where you say, like, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, because it feels like they're not connected. Like, why am I really watching this? If you've ever watched, there's a documentary on South Park that Matt Stone and Trey Parker do, where they talk about a method they use to help them kind of make each episode of South Park make more sense. And that's called and, but, and therefore. So what they do is they take a scene and they kind of piggyback off whatever either the premise is or the previous scene with the character. And they say, and this happens, but because of that, this happens, therefore this has to happen. Now, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It can be kind of weird. They might actually explain it better in their video, so you can check it out on YouTube or, like I said, Google. And I like to use that as a way to get to that therefore. That therefore is the consequence of whatever the characters decided to do in that scene or that pivotal moment. So I haven't yet begun throwing anything at the characters in terms of obstacles or direct challenges, but I like to get a sense that the characters are the ones driving the story through consequence. It can never feel like the story is happening, without the characters taking action. So even, I think a good example of something that doesn't work entirely well is like Indiana Jones, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones seems to be, throughout the movie, just kind of following the clues and going through the motions. But really, it's his action that compels consequence, right? He does not sit still and think. He just constantly is doing stuff, and that alone propels the story. And it keeps the adventure fun and light because he's always figuring, I gotta do this. So I'm gonna figure it out, like kind of just wing it. And it pays off for him. And then lastly, once I get to actually writing the screenplay, I use a theory called Meanwhile Back on the Farm. That is to take each scene or pivotal moment and then cut away to another character or a different place or something like that at the height of the action so that you leave your audience in suspense. You want them being like, oh my God, why would you do that? You think like, watching old episodes of like Dragon Ball Z and they would cut away to a commercial and you're like, no! Or another great example is like every episode ending of 24 ever is always just like a cliffhanger and you're like, how can they do this every week to me? And yet here I am back again to watch the next one because I just gotta know what happens. So again, I have my 3 stories. I have the fantasy story, the sitcom, and the military story. And what I'm looking to do now is begin writing and kind of outlining that sports season for each one. Now, as I mentioned in a couple videos ago, I have an idea kind of what those are. But I need to get definitive answers, what is the championship and what is the inciting incident so that I can fill in this space and start to have a little, sandbox or playground to play around in. Actually have my characters and their decisions and their, personalities start kind of dictating the story. Because ultimately, you want to have strong characters, and strong characters are people that are making choices, right? Our choices are truly what define us. It's not what we say defines us, it's what we do that defines us. So I want to make sure that I create a sandbox that's fun, that I've given the characters some room to breathe, and a compelling story that if I throw enough stakes at it and if I raise the stakes and constantly keep throwing challenges, something that I'm hoping our audience will care, right? Like I said, if you keep raising the stakes on the championship, all of a sudden you're like, well, I gotta know if they won. Like, what happened? Even if like the story, even if what I'm doing is not the ultimate story of all time, and you're like, man, I kind of want to just like skip to the end. The point is, you want to create something that is compelling enough that you're just like, I gotta know, did they win it or not? And if not, possibly for the next story, well, if they didn't win it, then what happened, right? If the school's gonna close, is that the end of the story? Just they closed it, everybody moved on and left, or is there more to that story? So that's kind of where I stand, and that's the method that I'm using for my writing, and it's something that has served me well, and I totally expect to completely, probably suck at this and get better as I go and refine the process and find the things that really truly work for me and this, stick figure world story. But I am interested in your guys' thoughts, or if you have any other additional advice for writing. Right now I'm talking about writing, and the irony is, like, the only way to write, is to just sit down and start going. Push-ups don't do themselves, I think, is the famous saying. So, or you can sit around and think about push-ups all day, but, like, the only way to do them is to do them. So writing is one of those tricky things where you have to dedicate a certain amount of time, right? And just say, like, no matter what, for 30 minutes, for an hour, for whatever, I'm gonna write, and I'm gonna figure this out. So this is my starting point. This is what I'm working on today, and as I mentioned in the previous video, we'll get into world building and character development and some of that other stuff down the road. But right now, I just need the full outline, the full idea of kind of like, here's where we're going. So time to get to work.